Lieutenant Commander Elena Martinez was completely innocent of the charges against her. Every single allegation was false. Every piece of evidence was misinterpreted or fabricated. Every witness was mistaken or lying. She could prove her innocence, had documentation, had alibis, had forensic evidence showing she couldn't have committed the crimes. None of it mattered, because the story people believed was more powerful than the truth. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, and once perception solidified, facts became irrelevant. Elena was convicted despite being innocent, not because the system failed to find the truth, but because the truth, once found, had no power against the story everyone had already decided to believe. This is about how truth can be irrelevant, how perception can override reality, how you can be objectively, provably, innocent and it doesn't matter because people have already made up their minds. It started with a patient death at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. Petty Officer Michael Torres, 23 years old, post-operative complication after routine surgery, developed a pulmonary embolism and died despite aggressive intervention. Tragic, but not suspicious. Pulmonary embolisms happen. The medical review found appropriate care. No negligence, just bad luck. Then Torres's mother, Sandra Torres, started asking questions, started researching, started finding patterns. She discovered that 3 other young patients had died at Camp Pendleton in the previous 2 years, all in the surgical recovery unit, all under the care of Lieutenant Commander Elena Martinez. Sandra created a website, Justice for Michael Torres, exposing suspicious deaths at Camp Pendleton. She posted, 4 young service members dead, same nurse, same unit. This isn't coincidence, this is murder. The website went viral. Military families shared it. Local news picked it up. Congressional representatives started asking questions. Why have 4 patients died under 1 nurse's care? Why hasn't the Navy investigated? What are they hiding? The Navy had investigated, had found that the deaths were unrelated medical events, but the perception was already set. Cover-up, suspicious pattern, possible serial killer. Elena went from respected ICU nurse to suspected murderer overnight, under public pressure. The Navy opened a formal investigation, not because they believed Elena was guilty, but because they needed to demonstrate transparency. NCIS reviewed all 4 cases. Case 1, Private Jackson, age 19, died of anaphylactic shock from previously unknown penicillin allergy during post-op antibiotic administration. Elena had followed protocol, had no way to know about the allergy since Jackson had never been exposed to penicillin before. Death ruled unavoidable adverse reaction. Case 2, Corporal Davis, age 22, died of massive hemorrhage from surgical complication. Elena had recognized the emergency immediately, called for help within seconds, provided appropriate intervention. Surgeon testified the hemorrhage was unsurvivable regardless of nursing response. Death ruled surgical complication, not nursing error. Case 3, Sergeant Williams, age 25, died of septic shock from post-operative infection. Elena had documented early signs, notified physicians, initiated treatment protocols. Investigation found the infection was resistant to standard antibiotics and progressed despite appropriate care. Death ruled unavoidable complication. Case 4, Petty Officer Torres, age 23, died of pulmonary embolism. Elena had assessed him appropriately, documented normal findings, followed all protocols. Embolism occurred suddenly with no warning signs. Death ruled unpredictable medical event. NCI's conclusion, Lieutenant Commander Martinez provided appropriate care in all 4 cases. The deaths were unrelated medical events, with no evidence of negligence or misconduct. We find no basis for charges. The Navy released the report, expected the matter to be closed, but Sandra Torres rejected it. Cover-up. The Navy is protecting their own 4 dead sons, and they're saying it's just coincidence. I don't believe it. Sandra's website grew. She found experts, nurses who'd never worked with Elena, but were willing to say the deaths seemed suspicious. Bloggers who specialized in conspiracy theories, congressional staffers who wanted a cause to champion. The narrative became, Navy nurse killed for patients, and the Navy covered it up. Social media amplified it. Justice for Michael Torres became a hashtag. News programs ran segments, Are military hospitals safe? The case of 4 suspicious deaths. Elena tried to defend herself, released a statement. These were tragic medical events. I provided appropriate care. Multiple investigations have cleared me. But her statement was drowned out by Sandra's campaign. Every news story mentioned the suspicious pattern of deaths. Every social media post called her the Navy nurse who killed 4 young men. The perception was set. Truth was irrelevant. Congressional hearings were demanded. Senator Patricia Walsh, facing a tough re-election campaign, seized the issue. 4 young service members are dead. The Navy says it's just coincidence. But families deserve answers. We need independent investigation. Walsh convened hearings, called Sandra Torres to testify. Sandra told her story emotionally. My son Michael was healthy, recovering well. Then suddenly he died while under Commander Martinez's care. The Navy says it was just bad luck. But for deaths, that's not luck, that's a pattern. Alina was called to testify, explained each case medically, provided documentation, showed she'd followed protocols, but she was cross-examined aggressively. Commander Martinez, isn't it true that all 4 patients died on your shifts? Yes, but isn't it true that other nurses in your unit haven't had any patients die in the same time period? That's statistical variance. I work with the sickest. Isn't it convenient that every time you're asked about these deaths, there's an explanation? 4 explanations for 4 deaths. The hearing wasn't about finding truth. It was about creating a public moment. Walsh got her soundbite. The Navy cleared her. But I'm not convinced. Families deserve justice. The perception solidified further. Even a U.S. senator thought Alina was suspicious. The Navy faced impossible pressure. The NCIS investigation had cleared Alina. The medical evidence supported her. But public perception demanded prosecution. The Navy JAG office was instructed. Find a way to charge her. JAG reviewed the cases again. Couldn't find evidence of murder. Couldn't find evidence of negligence. But they found technicalities. In the Jackson case, Alina had documented her allergy assessment 3 minutes after administering the antibiotic instead of immediately before. Technical violation of documentation protocol. In the Davis case, Alina had called for the surgeon 1 minute after recognizing the hemorrhage instead of immediately. Technical delay in escalation. In the Williams case, Alina had documented vital signs every 2 hours instead of every hour during a specific 12-hour period. Technical violation of monitoring protocol. In the Torres case, Alina had charted her assessment at 1400 hours, but the cardiac arrest occurred at 1347. Possible documentation timing discrepancy. None of these were criminal. They were minor documentation issues that happened daily in every hospital without consequence. But JAG charged her anyway. 4 counts of negligent homicide, 4 counts of dereliction of duty, multiple counts of false official statements. The documentation timing issues. The charges weren't about what happened medically. They were about documentation, technicalities that could be spun as evidence of wrongdoing. Alina's lawyer was stunned. These are documentation timing issues, not crimes. You're charging her with murder based on charting 3 minutes late. We're charging her with a pattern of substandard care that contributed to 4 deaths. Your own investigation found she provided appropriate care. That was before political pressure required a different conclusion. The prosecution's case was thin on facts, but strong on emotion. They called Sandra Torres to testify. She told the story of her son's death, showed pictures, cried. Commander Martinez killed my son. The Navy knows it. They're just protecting her. They called the other 3 families. Each told their story. Each said they believed Alina was responsible, but they had no medical evidence, no expert testimony that Alina had done anything wrong. Just families' grief and anger searching for someone to blame. The prosecution focused on the technicalities. Commander Martinez documented her allergy assessment 3 minutes after giving the medication. That's a violation of protocol. That violation contributed to Private Jackson's death. Alina's defense attorney objected. 3-minute documentation delay doesn't cause anaphylactic shock. The allergy caused the death. The timing of charting is irrelevant. But the jury heard. She violated protocol. A patient died. She's responsible. The prosecution built their entire case on documentation, timing, and chart entries. Never addressed the medical reality that Alina had provided appropriate care and the deaths were unavoidable. Because medical reality didn't matter, the narrative mattered. Alina's defense presented overwhelming medical evidence of her innocence. They called the attending surgeon who'd operated on Corporal Davis. The hemorrhage Commander Martinez responded to was a catastrophic surgical complication. It was even if she'd called for me instantly, which she essentially did, Davis would have died. She did everything correctly. They called the infectious disease specialist who'd treated Sergeant Williams. The infection was resistant to all standard antibiotics. It progressed to septic shock despite appropriate treatment. Commander Martinez recognized the signs early and initiated proper protocols. The death was unavoidable. They called an allergy specialist. Private Jackson had never been exposed to penicillin before. There was no way to know he had the allergy. Once anaphylaxis began, Commander Martinez responded immediately with epinephrine and emergency protocols. The 3-minute documentation delay had zero impact on the outcome. He died because of the allergy, not because of documentation timing. They called a pulmonary specialist. Petty Officer Torres's pulmonary embolism was sudden and massive. There were no warning signs in the assessment Commander Martinez documented. The 13-minute gap between her assessment and the arrest doesn't indicate she missed anything. It indicates the embolism occurred suddenly after she'd assessed him. This is textbook unpredictable medical event. They presented statistics. Commander Martinez's patient mortality rate is actually below the unit average. Her complication rate is below average. Her patients have better outcomes than expected, given their acuity level. The 4 deaths are statistical clustering, not evidence of poor care. They presented Elena's personnel file. 15 years of excellent evaluations, multiple commendations, awards for clinical excellence, 0 prior complaints or concerns. The medical evidence was overwhelming. Elena was an excellent nurse who'd provided appropriate care to 4 patients, who died of unavoidable medical complications. But the jury wasn't listening to medical evidence. They were listening to the narrative they'd already absorbed from months of media coverage. The prosecution didn't engage with the medical evidence. They couldn't. It all supported Elena. Instead, they focused on perception. For young men are dead. For families are grieving. And Commander Martinez wants you to believe it's just coincidence, that she just happened to be unlucky 4 times. She wants you to believe that minor documentation violations don't matter. But if those violations don't matter, why does the Navy have protocols requiring immediate documentation? Why require nurses to chart precisely if it's irrelevant? She wants you to believe she's an excellent nurse. But excellent nurses don't have 4 patients die in 2 years. Excellent nurses don't violate documentation protocols. Excellent nurses don't need expert witnesses to explain away their failures. The prosecution's closing argument never addressed the medical facts, just the emotional narrative for young men. For grieving families, one nurse who was there every time. You know in your hearts what happened here. Don't let technical medical testimony blind you to the obvious truth. Elena's lawyer objected repeatedly. Your Honor, the prosecution is asking the jury to ignore medical evidence and convict based on emotion and innuendo. The judge sustained some objections, but couldn't stop the jury from hearing what they'd heard. The jury deliberated for 3 days, came back divided. They couldn't convict on the murder charges even. They couldn't ignore that the medical evidence showed the deaths were unavoidable, but they convicted on the dereliction of duty charges, found that Elena's documentation timing violations constituted failure to provide adequate care for counts of dereliction of duty, not because they believed she'd killed anyone, but because they believed the narrative that someone needed to be held responsible. The judge sentenced Elena to 2 years confinement, dishonorable discharge, and loss of rank. Elena stood in shock as the verdict was read. I provided appropriate care. Every expert said so. The NCIS investigation cleared me. How can I be convicted when I'm innocent? Her lawyer had no answer, because the truth was irrelevant. The perception had won. Elena appealed. Her lawyers argued that the conviction was unsupported by evidence. That documentation timing violations don't constitute dereliction when the actual care provided was appropriate. They presented the same medical evidence, the same expert testimony, the same proof that Elena had done nothing wrong medically. The appeals court acknowledged the medical evidence, wrote, "The medical testimony strongly supports that Lieutenant Commander Martinez provided appropriate care and that the patient deaths were unavoidable complications." However, the jury's verdict on the dereliction charges was not unreasonable given the documentation violations. Elena's lawyer was incredulous. They're saying she's medically innocent, but administratively guilty. That doesn't make sense. But it made perfect sense in a world where perception mattered more than truth. The appeals court couldn't overturn the conviction without appearing to ignore the 4 dead patients and the grieving families and the public outcry. Truth was irrelevant. Perception was everything. Appeal denied. Alina served 2 years at the Naval Consolidated Brig, every day surrounded by people who'd actually committed crimes. Other inmates asked what she'd done. I'm here for 4 counts of dereliction of duty. What did you do? I charted an assessment 3 minutes late. That's it. 4 patients died of medical complications while I was their nurse. Their families blamed me. The media created a narrative, and the Navy convicted me to satisfy public perception. Most inmates didn't believe her. Everyone in here says they're innocent. I actually am innocent. I can prove it. I have expert testimony, medical evidence. My own investigation cleared me. Then why are you here? Because the truth didn't matter. The story people believed mattered more. Some inmates understood. The ones who'd been convicted despite questionable evidence, who'd been sacrificed to public pressure, who'd learned that justice and truth aren't the same thing. Alina spent 2 years surrounded by people who'd actually harmed others, while she'd saved countless lives over 15 years of nursing, and was imprisoned for 4 deaths she couldn't have prevented. Alina was released after 2 years, dishonorable discharge on her record, convicted felon, nursing license revoked. She tried to rebuild, applied for civilian nursing positions. Every interview ended the same way. I see you have a dishonorable discharge and a conviction for dereliction of duty, resulting in patient deaths. Can you explain? 4 patients died of unavoidable medical complications. I was cleared by NCIS medical experts testified. I provided appropriate care. I was convicted because of public pressure, not because I did anything wrong. So you're saying you're innocent, despite being convicted? Yes, I can show you the medical evidence. We can't hire someone with patient deaths on their record, regardless of the circumstances. It's a liability issue. The truth was documented, proven, available, but employers couldn't afford to hire someone with her record because perception was reality in risk management. Alina ended up working retail, minimum wage, no benefits. 15 years of nursing experience and excellence, rendered worthless by a narrative that overrode truth. Sandra Torres continued her advocacy. Her website expanded. Justice for our fallen service members, holding the military accountable. She spoke at veterans events, testified before Congress, became a recognized advocate for military families. In every speech, she told Michael's story. My son died because of negligent care. The nurse responsible was convicted, but she only served 2 years. That's not justice. We need stronger accountability for military medical personnel. Sandra genuinely believed Alina had killed Michael. No amount of medical evidence would change her mind. Her grief required someone to blame. Alina was that person. A journalist who'd covered the trial reached out to Alina. I'm doing a follow-up story. 5 years later. How do you reflect on what happened? I reflect on the fact that I'm innocent. That multiple investigations proved I'm innocent. That medical experts testified I'm innocent. And that none of it mattered because the story people believed was more powerful than the truth. Do you blame Sandra Torres? I blame a system that allowed perception to override evidence. I blame media that amplified a false narrative. I blame politicians who exploited tragedy for their careers. Sandra is a grieving mother who needed someone to blame. I understand that. What I don't understand is why everyone else enabled the lie. Do you think you'll ever clear your name? I already cleared my name. Multiple times, through investigations and expert testimony. The problem isn't that my name isn't cleared. It's that clearing your name doesn't matter when people have already decided to believe something else. The journalist published the article, convicted but innocent, when truth doesn't matter. Few people read it. It didn't go viral. It didn't change anyone's mind who'd already decided. Alina was guilty, because that's how it works when truth is irrelevant. Facts are available but have no power. Senator Walsh retired after a successful career. In her farewell speech, she mentioned the Alina Martinez case as one of her proudest achievements. I fought for accountability when 4 young service members died suspiciously. I made sure the responsible party faced justice. Walsh genuinely believed she'd done something good, had no doubt that Alina was guilty. The appeals that cleared Alina, Walsh never read them. The expert testimony, Walsh dismissed it as the military protecting their own. Walsh had constructed a narrative and never questioned it. Truth was irrelevant to her worldview. Alina saw the farewell speech on news, felt exhausted anger, She destroyed my life for her career, and she believes she's a hero. Elena's few remaining friends asked, "Have you considered writing a book, telling your full story?" "I've told my story multiple times. 2 investigators, 2 judges, 2 journalists. The story is out there. It just doesn't matter. People who want to believe I'm guilty will ignore the evidence. People who want to believe the system is corrupt will use my case as proof. The actual truth that I'm innocent and that perception overrode reality is too complicated for anyone to care about. So you just accept it." "I accept that truth can be irrelevant, that you can prove your innocence and still be punished. That reality and perception are different things, and perception usually wins." Elena paused. "I'm innocent. I know it. The evidence shows it, and it doesn't matter. That's the reality I live with." Another Navy nurse was accused of suspicious patient deaths. Different hospital, different circumstances, but similar media narrative. Pattern of deaths raises questions. Elena watched the coverage with grim recognition. This is how it starts. Someone will notice a statistical cluster. Media will create a narrative. Facts won't matter. Another innocent nurse will be destroyed. She reached out to the accused nurse, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "I don't know if you're innocent or guilty, but I know that truth might be irrelevant to what happens to you. Document everything. Get expert witnesses early. Don't assume evidence will protect you." Kim was grateful but confused. "But if I'm innocent and I can prove it, won't that matter?" "It should, but it might not. The narrative might be more powerful than the truth. That's what happened to me." Kim didn't believe her, still thought truth would prevail. Elena understood. She'd once believed that too. Elena was 62, 20 years since her conviction, still working retail, still carrying a felony record for deaths she didn't cause. A law student contacted her. "I'm writing a thesis on wrongful military convictions. Your case is fascinating. You were medically cleared but administratively convicted. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" "What's the point? I've told this story for 20 years. Nothing changes. Maybe someone needs to document it, for the record, so the truth exists even if it doesn't have power right now." Elena agreed to the interview, told her story again, showed the documentation, the NCIS report, the expert testimony, the medical evidence proving her innocence. The law student was shocked. "This is incredible. You're clearly innocent. How were you convicted with this evidence?" "Because truth was irrelevant. Perception was reality. For families needed someone to blame. The media needed a story. Politicians needed a cause. The Navy needed to show accountability. And I was convenient. But the truth is right here. Documented. Proven. The truth has been right here for 22 years. Available to anyone who wants to look. But people don't want truth. They want the story they already believe." The thesis was completed, filed in a law school library, read by perhaps a dozen people. The truth existed, documented, proven, available, and still irrelevant, because that's how it works. Sometimes you can be provably, objectively, documentably innocent, and it doesn't matter. The story people believe becomes reality, and truth, no matter how clear, has no power against it. Elena Martinez was innocent. The evidence proved it, and she spent the rest of her life paying for crimes she didn't commit, because truth was irrelevant.